Every time I tell people I go to Yale in US, they just hear the Yale part and they get really excited and they're like, oh my god, you go to Yale? Not really. So is it like Yale in Asia? It can be whatever you want it to be. I'm Emily, I'm a junior at Yale and US College, soon to be visiting student at Yale University. Clearly I have a type. Today I'm going to be breaking down my entire college application from A to Z. Everything that I can share with you, I will share with you, so let's jump right into it. Starting off with spilling the tea all about my grades, which, spoiler warning, are very terrible. I'm kind of embarrassed to share them. So I was in the Malaysian public school system for the first 2 years of high school, and I switched over to the British school system, and I took A-levels for the last 2 years of high school. In those two systems, we use letter grades, so that's like A, B, C, D, all of that, and we don't use GPA. But for those of you who do use GPA, I have converted my grades using this scale over here. Now keep in mind, this conversion is not official, and colleges definitely do not require you to convert your grades. They are going to evaluate your grades in its original form that you give to them. So starting off with grade 9 and grade 10, which I spent in the Malaysian public school system. For grade 9, these were my grades, and I got a cumulative 2.26 GPA. Not that great. Moving on to grade 10. These were my grades. Now in the Malaysian high school system, we take our final public examination in grade 10. So that's what I did. I took the SPM, which stands for Sijil Pendidikan Malaysia. Actually, it might stand for something else. I don't know. It's been 6 years. So for that, I got 7 A's and 2 B's, which was a 3.78 GPA. So my first 2 years of high school definitely is quite a clear upward trend from 2.26 to 2.74, ending off with that 3.78 that I graduated with. Now at this point, I didn't really have any solid reasons explaining why my grades were so bad. It's because I just genuinely didn't really care about studying when I was younger, so that's why they're just bad. As I started to grow older and started to find more interest in school, naturally my grades picked up together with that as well. So for the last 2 years of high school, grade 11 and grade 12, I switched over to the British high school system and I did Cambridge A-levels. So in grade 11, my GPA was 2.88, so it went back down from when I graduated in grade 10. And for the Cambridge AS level, which is the midway point of the full 2-year A-level program, I got a 3.5, and these were my grades. So I broke that upward trend that I had the first 2 years of high school, because when I transitioned over from the Malaysian system to the British system, I found it really hard to adjust. And alongside that, I was dealing with some mental health struggles, so obviously my grades took a hit. But I did have an upward trend in the end right before I was applying for college. Now I did include a note in my application explaining why my grades went back down after that initial upward trend. And I said that it's really due to some mental health issues that I was struggling with, and that the school could contact me if they needed any additional information on that part. Yeah, so here is a summary page of all of my grades. As you can see, they had all sorts of different letters of the alphabet, and my GPA was definitely not perfect. I think this really goes to show that bad grades are really okay. I definitely didn't have a perfect upward trend. I went up and down and then up again. I think as long as you end off on a good note right before when you apply for college, that's okay. And especially so if you do have very solid reasons, if you are able to explain why you weren't able to reach your full academic ability, that's very helpful as well. So I took the SAT once and I got a 1460. I got 700 for the reading and writing section, and I got a 760 for the math section. I also took the essay part, and for that I got 778, which is 22 out of 24. Before we go into the more personally driven parts of the application, I'm going to briefly explain what the story of my application was. So my story was that I am an intended international relations major who's really passionate about education and inequity as well as gender issues in Malaysia. And I really made sure to tailor every single component, like the essays, the interview, my ECs, to fit with this story and really showcase to the admissions officer what I had to bring to the table. So the Yale US application had a bunch of short questions, which were 150 characters maximum each. I'm going to explain what the questions are and quickly go through my answers to them. So the first question was, my friends would be surprised to know that I ... So here I wrote about my personal interest and hobby in watching fashion shows in my free time. I do have a personal appreciation for fashion, which is something that's quite private for me, so none of my friends would have known this. Next question was, how have you changed in the past 2 years? I wrote about how I used to have a really unhealthy relationship with setting unrealistic expectations and goals for myself. Fast forward 3 years later, I now have and I'm working towards having a more healthy relationship with goal setting. What challenges you? I wrote about math and how I find it very difficult and very rewarding at the same time. Now see how I took this opportunity to really highlight my struggle in math and turn it into an asset instead of a weakness in my college application, since I did have a couple of fails in math. What item will you bring to Yale and US that represents your community and why? It's a bit of a cliche, but I wrote that I would bring a Malaysian flag because I'm really proud of my identity as a Malaysian student. What is the question that you want answered? I wrote about how I'm curious to know what 2020 vision feels like because I've been wearing glasses since I was 4 years old, and I made a small joke about how if I was born in prehistoric times before glasses were invented, I would die pretty quickly because I would be easy prey. There were other questions like what is the highest level of study you intend to pursue? So I wrote that I intend to pursue a master's in public policy as well as a PhD in education studies in the future. There was also a question about career plans. I wrote that I intend to work in education, research and development. Fast forward 4 years later, that's definitely changed. So it's okay, nothing you write on your college application is truly going to be set in stone. I only decided to apply for college 2 weeks before the deadline. I was originally going to take a gap year, but suddenly last minute I felt like applying. So I did write all of my essays very last minute. In my opinion, they're quite terrible. The main essay, I went with this prompt, which is some students have a background, identity, interest, or talent that is so meaningful, blah, blah, blah. You can just read the rest of it on the screen. So for this essay, I wrote about my passion for education and education reform in Malaysia based on my experiences in the Malaysian public school system. So for my supplemental essays, the first one was an open prompt. So I wrote about my passion for gender issues in Malaysia and my struggles with advocating for women's rights, which is definitely a very personal story to me. So I'm glad I got to share that in my college application. One in particular about Yale and US has influenced your decision to apply. I wrote about how I actually booked a campus tour and I flew in from Malaysia to Singapore to attend this, but I got the date wrong. So when I came, there was no one on the campus. So I just aimlessly walked around, and the more I walked around, the more I fell in love with the place until a security guard chased me out. I haven't really seen anyone talk about this, but I think that's such an important part of the college application, your recommendation letters from your teachers. I can't share exactly what they wrote because I waived my right to see my letters, but I can share what I asked each of my teachers to help highlight in my application. I was definitely very strategic with what I asked each recommender to help highlight. So I got my first letter from my sociology teacher, and I asked her because sociology was my best subject out of everything else in high school. So I asked her to help highlight my passion and my aptitude for social sciences, as well as how it ties into my passion for community service, specifically within the education field in Malaysia. I got my second letter from my law teacher and I asked her to help highlight my aptitude for law as well as my writing skills. I don't think this was the strongest recommendation because I wasn't really close with this teacher like I was with my sociology teacher, and I wasn't the best student in the class. I was doing okay, but I wasn't the best, and that's why I asked 2 other additional recommenders. So I got 2 supplemental recommendations. The first one was from my school counselor, and I asked her to help highlight my struggles with math in high school and how I improved gradually over the years. The next was from my teacher advisor for my school club, Girl Up, which I'll explain more in my EC section. And I asked her to highlight my experiences with starting and growing the club in my high school. My extracurriculars were definitely one of the stronger parts of my application. I had very strong spikes in international relations, education equity, as well as gender issues. First is with my education-related activities. I have 4 activities under this theme. The first one was I co-founded Book My Happiness, which is a social enterprise in the education sector in Malaysia. We help build libraries in underprivileged communities in Malaysia to help boost English literacy. Next was I participated in the Youth Leadership Academy 2018, which was a leadership development program as well as social enterprise incubator for Malaysian youths. It's actually where I met the co-founders of the social enterprise, who are some of my best friends up till today, and we did end up winning the final pitch competition together. Next, I started a tutoring program which helped connect students in my school to kids in a local community school for Burmese refugee children. Research assistant on a research project by the Association of Malaysian Economic Undergraduates and the Malaysian Economic Association on university governance in Malaysia. Now for my gender issues related activities. Firstly, I was the president of my school's Girl Up chapter. So Girl Up is a organization under United Nations Foundation aimed at promoting women's empowerment and advancement in the world. I also organized my school's first Menstrual Health Awareness Day. Now this was actually under the Girl Up Club, but since this event was such a big deal for me, I did include it as a separate activity, and there's definitely something you can do in your own activity section as well. Lastly were my international relations related activities, which surprise surprise is MUN. So I was the co-founder of my school's MUN club, which was the first MUN club in my city, and I actually believe the first MUN club in my entire state. I was part of the organizing committee for Selangor MUN. Selangor is a state in Malaysia. I was the director of outreach, and my main role was to organize community outreach programs to help increase the accessibility of MUN for lower income students. As you can see, I didn't even fill up all 10 slots. My list only consisted of 8 activities, but I made sure that every single activity on my list contributed to strengthening my overall story and my narrative. I interviewed directly with an admissions officer, and this happened over Zoom and lasted for around 1 hour. I won't go too in-depth into this or else this video will be very long, but let me know if you want to see a more in-depth breakdown of my college interview as well as how to really ace the interview portion of your college application. I'll say the questions can be broadly grouped into 3 categories. So we talked about my personality and my experiences with leadership. Then we talked about my academic interests and passions. And lastly, we also talked about some school fit questions. So why Yale and US and all of that. Starting off with the more personality related questions. So one of the questions was, what do you spend your free time doing? Questions like these are really great because you can really choose what parts of yourself you want to highlight as well as strengthen again your overall application story. So I talked about how I spend a lot of my free time doing community service because that's something I'm really passionate about. I talked about my interests in education equity as well as gender issues and my experiences within those 2 areas. I also shared a bit more personal details about my love for baking, even though I'm quite bad at it. My interviewer also specifically asked about the Youth Leadership Academy. I'm assuming that was to launch into a conversation about leadership and my perspectives on leadership. So I shared my experiences being a leader, my struggles being a leader, as well as what I've learned from being a leader in all my different involvements in high school. There were only 2 questions for the academic part, but they were quite big questions, so I think it took up a lot of the conversation time. The first question was, what is your favorite subject in school and why? So I really highlighted my love for sociology and why I'm really passionate about studying society and how society keeps changing, especially in the times that we live in. Next, she asked about what is one subject you don't enjoy in high school. And again, I used this opportunity to highlight my struggle with math and how I find it super challenging but ultimately very rewarding. Ultimately, this helped to flip the narrative about my weaknesses in math away from it being a bad thing towards being a good thing that showcased how resilient and persistent I am to get better at math. I think the last part of the interview was mainly to assess my overall fit with Yale and US. So she asked quite standard questions of like, why Yale and US? I really talked about my fascination with the whole East meets West approach that they uniquely have at Yale and US and not really anywhere else in the world. Last part of the interview was the opportunity for me to ask my interviewer questions. So I took this opportunity to really highlight just how committed I am to attending to school if I get accepted. I asked about specific clubs that I was interested in joining. I asked about the possibility of doing research with a specific professor that does research in education studies, which is what I'm really passionate about. I also asked about campus jobs available and a specific place that I wanted to work at on campus. Yeah, really sending all the signals like, hey, I want to go to your school. Like, I really want to go to your school. Please let me in. I think my strengths definitely lie in how strong my story was. I had a very clear idea of what I bring to the table as an applicant and what I had to contribute to the UMS community if they were to admit me, and I emphasized this over and over again in my essays, in my extracurriculars, in my recommendation letters, as well as my interview. So the personality aspects of the application is where I really shined. My main weakness was that my grades and my test scores were on the lower side for a school of this caliber, but I think that was okay because I had a general upward trend and I ended off on a good note right before I applied to college. I also had good reasons explaining why my grades were the way that they were, such as transitioning to a new school system as well as struggling with mental health for a bit. I know my school is closing down and no one's going to be applying anymore, which is very sad, but I hope this is helpful for people who are applying for other colleges. If you're applying this year, all the best, you got this!